Like, subscribe, and hype the video. Also, leave a comment on any topics you want to hear about in the future. Okay, let's dive in. In our last episode, we walked through the real story of the Tunguska event, the largest impact event in recorded human history, an explosion equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshima bombs over a remote Siberian forest in 1908, with no crater and no intact meteorite remains, now understood by mainstream science as an asteroid or comet fragment airburst several miles above the ground. Today, we're getting into every alternative theory that's been proposed over the past century, starting with the legitimate scientific debates and working our way through to the considerably stranger corners of this topic. Because Tunguska, precisely because it happened in such a remote location with so little physical evidence left behind, has become one of the most fertile grounds for alternative explanations in the entire history of unexplained events. Let's start with a debate that's entirely within the boundaries of mainstream science, because even among researchers who agree the event was a natural airburst, there has been genuine, ongoing scientific disagreement about the exact nature of the impacting object, specifically whether it was a rocky asteroid fragment or an icy comet nucleus. The comet hypothesis was actually the dominant scientific explanation for several decades following the initial investigations. Proponents argued that the complete absence of any recovered meteorite material was more naturally explained by a comet, largely made of ice that would vaporize almost completely during an airburst, than by a rocky asteroid, which would normally be expected to leave at least some surviving fragments somewhere in the affected area. The asteroid hypothesis gained ground as computer modeling of airburst events improved, particularly following comparisons with the Chelyabinsk event in 2013, which provided much better documented data on how rocky objects behave during atmospheric entry and explosion. Modern models suggest that a rocky asteroid of the right size and composition could also disintegrate sufficiently completely in a high-energy airburst to leave minimal surface fragments without requiring the object to be cometary in nature. Most researchers today lean toward an asteroid or stony asteroid fragment as the most likely culprit, but the question isn't fully settled, and both hypotheses remain scientifically defensible based on the available evidence. Like, subscribe, and hype the video. And now let's get into the theories that move considerably further from the mainstream. In the decades following the Tunguska event, as physicists developed a deeper understanding of antimatter, particles identical to normal matter but with opposite charge, some researchers propose that the complete absence of meteorite debris at Tunguska could be explained if the impacting object were composed of antimatter rather than conventional matter. When antimatter comes into contact with normal matter, the two annihilate each other in a burst of pure energy, converting entirely to radiation rather than leaving any physical remains behind. An antimatter asteroid or comet entering Earth's atmosphere would, in theory, interact with the air molecules around it and annihilate completely before reaching the ground, leaving no crater, no fragments, and no conventional material evidence of its passage, exactly the pattern observed at Tunguska. The antimatter hypothesis was taken seriously enough to be published and discussed in scientific literature during the mid-20th century. However, it faces significant physical problems. Antimatter is extraordinarily rare in our observable universe. The mechanisms that would produce and maintain a macroscopic object composed of antimatter in the natural interstellar environment aren't supported by any known astrophysical process. Modern particle physics and cosmology provide no plausible natural source for an antimatter asteroid of the size required to cause the Tunguska event, making this explanation creative but physically implausible given what we currently understand about how matter is distributed in the universe. This next theory is one of the more physically creative explanations proposed for Tunguska, and it generated genuine scientific discussion when it was first published in the 1970s. The miniature black hole hypothesis proposed that the Tunguska event was caused not by a conventional cosmic object at all, but by a tiny black hole, too small to observe directly, that passed through Earth, entering the atmosphere over Siberia and exiting somewhere in the North Atlantic Ocean on the other side. The physics of how a miniature black hole would interact with Earth's atmosphere could, in theory, produce an energy release consistent with the Tunguska explosion. And its passage completely through the planet would explain the absence of any material remains. The object would have passed through and continued into space, leaving nothing behind except the energy deposited during its transit. The theory has a testable prediction built into it. If a miniature black hole had passed through Earth, there should have been a corresponding exit event on the opposite side of the planet, where the black hole emerged from the Earth's surface and re-entered the atmosphere, producing another shock wave, another anomalous atmospheric disturbance, or some other detectable signature roughly consistent in timing with the Tunguska explosion, accounting for travel time through the planet. Researchers examining historical records for such a corresponding event on the other side of the planet at the right time found no convincing evidence of one, which is the main reason this hypothesis, while intellectually entertaining, hasn't gained traction as a serious explanation. The predicted exit event simply doesn't appear in the historical record. Like, subscribe and hype the video. And now let's get into the claim that gets the most attention online. This is the theory that keeps Tunguska in conspiracy and alternative history circles to this day, and it comes in several different versions depending on which source you encounter. The most common version claims that the Tunguska explosion was caused by an alien spacecraft that either malfunctioned and exploded in Earth's atmosphere, deliberately self-destructed to avoid crashing onto populated land, or was destroyed by some kind of defensive action, with some versions naming Nikola Tesla as having potentially tested his rumored long-range energy weapon and accidentally or deliberately destroying an incoming craft. A Russian researcher named Alexander Kazantsev began promoting the alien spacecraft theory in the 1940s, specifically drawing comparisons between Tunguska and the atomic bomb explosions at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, arguing that the mid-air detonation pattern was more consistent with a nuclear explosion than with a conventional meteor impact. While this comparison was striking enough to generate popular interest, subsequent analysis of the actual evidence, including the tree fall pattern, the energy yield, the lack of radiation signatures consistent with a nuclear detonation, and the eyewitness accounts of a visible object moving through the sky before the explosion, is more consistently explained by the natural airburst model than by any nuclear or propulsion-based explosion. The Tesla connection in particular lacks supporting evidence. Tesla was in New York at the time of the event, and while he did claim to have worked on long-range energy transmission technology, no confirmed functional version of such a weapon has ever been documented, let alone one capable of causing an explosion at this scale in Siberia. The investigation of the Tunguska event has not stopped. Research teams have continued working in the region for decades, using increasingly sophisticated techniques to extract whatever physical evidence might still remain from the event over a century later. One of the most significant recent developments involved analysis of sediment cores taken from Lake Chaco, a small lake located about 8 kilometers from the estimated epicenter of the explosion. Some researchers propose that Lake Chaco might itself be an impact crater, formed by a fragment of the Tunguska object that survived the airburst and struck the ground at this location. Analysis of the lake sediments produced dates suggesting the lake is considerably older than 1908, which most researchers interpreted as evidence against this hypothesis. However, the debate about Lake Chico's origin has continued in the scientific literature, with different teams reaching different conclusions from the available sediment data. More recently, expeditions to the region have recovered microscopic spherules, tiny glassy particles, from peat layers formed at the time of the 1908 event, with chemical compositions consistent with the high-temperature melting and rapid cooling of silicate rock material during an airburst. These particles represent some of the most direct physical evidence of the event's nature, supporting the rocky asteroid interpretation, while remaining too fragmentary to fully settle every remaining question about the object's exact composition and origin. So here's where every Tunguska theory actually lands. The mainstream airburst explanation, most likely a rocky asteroid fragment, fits the available evidence better than any alternative, and is consistent with the treefall pattern, the energy estimates, the eyewitness accounts, and the microscopic material recovered from the site. The comet hypothesis remains scientifically defensible, but less favored by current modeling. The antimatter and miniature black hole theories are creative, but face serious physical problems that their proponents haven't resolved. And the alien spacecraft theory, while persistently popular in alternative circles, hasn't produced any evidence that survives careful comparison with the natural airburst model. What makes Tunguska genuinely fascinating isn't that it's unexplained. It's that it's the single best documented example of a real cosmic impact event in recorded human history, and it happened over an empty forest rather than a city. Everything we've learned from studying it has made us better prepared to recognize and respond to the next one. If you've made it through both episodes, let me know in the comments which Tunguska theory you find most interesting. Like, subscribe, and hype the video, and I'll see you in the next one.